mother always, may she rest in peace, every year, she could take the most tragic of years and she could just turn them into creamy chocolate candy floss. And it looks so good.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth.
And I'm Missy. And this is You Should Meet My Friend. Today's guest is my personal friend, Helen Patton. She is I don't know, CEO is quite the right term, but maybe the star, the face of
Chairman, founder.
Chairman. Yeah. Yes, there you go. Of the Patton Foundation. And the mission of the Patton Foundation, according to their website, is to lead from the front. And the way that they see that is to continue the Patton legacy of service through creativity, inspiration, and education, restore and enhance the image, virtue, and purpose of America, focus on veterans, active duty military, first responders, and their families, rekindle and share the true heart of American patriotism, expand Patton's Third Army to include us all, unite in strength, freedom, and dignity. And other affiliated organizations that Helen has created and serve are the Patton Alliance, the Patton Legacy Sports, which showcases the Remembrance Bowl. And this bowl is to remember the original Champagne Bowl of 1944 that was planned as a way to boost morale during World War II, but is now remembered as the game that never happened. And in recent years, Helen has revived that Remembrance Bowl. As Helen says on her LinkedIn page.
Not alone. Not alone.
Yes. She never does anything alone.
No, but I'll tell you at the end, but definitely not alone.
As Helen says on her LinkedIn page, she is called to service by the legacy of leadership that she inherited as a Patton, continuing liberation and reconciliation for every generation by providing context for creative intercultural exploration. And yes, if our listeners are wondering, she is of that famous Patton family. Her grandfather was General George S Patton, as was her father, was also George S Patton IV, which I read is a very interesting story about how he became the fourth, or how he's the fourth. Yeah. And her father also served during the Korean War and Vietnam War. So Helen grew up as a military child. She has an impressive educational portfolio. I'm going to embarrass her because she's very humble. She has a BA of Fine Arts from the Catholic University of America, an acting diploma from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, a Master of Fine Arts in Directing from Northwestern, and a diploma from UCLA for screenwriting. Her favorite accomplishment, though, on her impressive resume is the mother of two wonderful, accomplished young men. And with all of that, she's still my friend. Helen and I met because we both lived in the same village in Germany and our children attended the same school. One day on a school outing with my son, Helen noticed I was speaking English to him, and thus a friendship that is 20 years old began. And for months, I had no idea who Helen was because she's that humble and gracious. And
my German was so good. You thought I was German.
I just appreciated that somebody spoke fluent German and English and could help this poor soul out. So with that, Helen, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you. Guess what? I think I know I've heard. I got a little preview on the questions, so we might as well get the first one over. If I was going to have a title of my biography, my life is an open book with a few pages ripped out.
That's fabulous.
Yeah, because not only because you can't fit it in, but it's not always all rosy. It's so funny. My mother always, may she rest in peace. She every year she could take the most tragic of years and she could just turn them into creamy chocolate candy floss, and it looks so good. But there were some tough times in there too. But yeah, thanks. I guess I answered your first question, by the way.
Yeah, no, that is fine. I'm sure Elizabeth has questions because we have talked about you for years. And when we first started this, I was like, I could probably get Helen. She's a high caliber guest.
I already told you, like off at the beginning before you started the recording, I said to me, my mother and my grandparents also would have been so proud to know you because you
Oh,
just are. Well, what you did was you take the military life and you so smoothly, I can see, brought it into civilian life and, keep that same spirit. Gosh, it's so important. I just miss that spirit. And I think the places that we've lived, we brought it along with us.
yeah.
So,
And I thought about that as I was thinking about some things I wanted to ask you. Well, I told you earlier when I talked to you, we learn so much even about our friends that we think we
mm,
know. Elizabeth and I have discovered a lot about each other just in doing these interviews. But I was a young military wife, and I feel like you and I learned a lot from each other.
mm,
We bounced ideas off of each other, and it's just been a
yeah,
friendship of mutual respect. I've learned a lot from you, Helen, about how to be a good military
yeah.
spouse and a champion for our military and just a good humanitarian. So
Well,
I appreciate
thanks. Thanks. Well, I
it.
just hope this is just the beginning because I remember thinking after you left, I thought, oh gosh, I don't think I ever spent enough time with Missy. I wish I'd
Oh,
spent more time with her. I was struggling with a lot of different kinds of friendships
yeah.
around there. Wasn't easy. I've got a lot of funny stories about Kayshofen. We could write a whole book about that. But yeah, but which is
Yeah.
still thriving, by the way. Kayshofen was never the same. We brought a
Yeah,
lot there. We did some cool stuff there. And
we
Kayshofen
do.
became also a bit of a more cohesive community, I think, because of the military presence there. And yeah, I loved Kayshofen. I was so sad to leave. Yeah.
Yeah. I we were definitely entrenched. Elizabeth, where did you live when you were in Germany?
Weilerbach.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
that's nice. Wasn't there a bar there like that had concerts all the time in Weilerbach?
Yeah, yeah. There are a couple nice places.
Yeah, I used to go there. It was so fun.
That's my biggest
Yeah.
dream is to someday live back in a community where you could just walk down to the bakery or walk to the little grocery store, or you could go have beers with friends and it was no big deal because you just had a 5-minute walk back up to where you're living. It was,
Well,
Yeah.
I can tell you that you should come here where I live in Sweden in my little village because it's exactly what I have.
Mhm.
Well,
It's amazing.
So
that's a good seg. Oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was going to say, what brought you to Sweden and how long have you been living there?
Can I first tell a quick story? Because I just have to get this off. When I will get to that. It was just when we were in Kayshofen. I remember getting a message from the school one day when our kids were in grade school or kindergarten or something. It said, Liebe Frau Plustik, Liebe Mrs. Patton Plustik,
Yeah.
don't forget to send Ingmar and Ragnar tomorrow with their pocket knives because we are going to take a walk in the woods.
Oh my gosh. Could you
So
imagine
those are the days.
doing
Those were
that?
the days. Those
Yeah.
were the days.
And
But anyway,
I
uh-huh.
cannot even
well,
imagine getting that kind of message here in the United States about
yeah.
taking next to school.
And Helen, I don't know if I ever told you, but I got a message from the school that Mrs. Keister, well, they didn't know. That's not how they pronounced it. We know you're an American family, but please do not send peanut butter and jelly sandwiches to school.
Really? I also sent peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. That's funny. I wonder why not.
I guess they were afraid I was just gonna, that's all I was gonna send was peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, which my son was like,
Yes.
he really wasn't that big into peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. But it was just
That's
funny because
funny.
I guess they just figured that's what all American school children ate were peanut butter and
If you
jelly
don't mind me
sandwiches.
being, if you don't mind me being unsavory, I remember the message saying, "Please tell your boy that he has to sit in the toilet." No
I can see
standing.
that. I can see
No
that. So
standing.
even though you spoke German and your children were German, you still got maybe a little
Oh boy,
hassled
did
for
I
being
ever.
an American, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
I had so many things. Oh, we could just make this whole podcast about this. I know you don't want to, so you're
Yeah.
gonna keep
No,
going.
no.
Okay.
So
Oh man.
how long you been in Sweden and
Okay,
why
so
are you there? And
Sweden came. I was writing a book with a friend, and we had to finish that up. And I came up here to do that. And at the same time, I was always thinking I really wanted to have somewhere in my life in Europe where I could depend on the snow. I really wanted to, because Germany the weather was changing and I wasn't getting the consistent snows that I just needed that. And I needed to have that kind of, yeah, I just needed it. And my son at the same time, Ragnar, came home from school and said, Mom, I had a lecture today. I guess one of his teachers gave a little PowerPoint about a place up north where there are sled dogs and no keys for the door. And I thought, I think I may know where that is. And he and I traveled to Sweden a couple of times and we loved it. And then while I was working on this book with this other author, the lady that I was staying with was a realtor of sorts. And she said, I've got this place I'm going to look at today. And I said, I really don't want to live here. I like to go a little further north, but I'll have a look at it. And I love the outside. And long story short, I bought it that weekend and it was owned by an American of all things. And I have to tell you, I'm 6 hours north of Stockholm.
Oh, wow.
And you're gonna love this. So I'm in a place called Sollefteå, which is Soleftea with a little circle on the top of the A, which makes it an O. And my name of my little village now is called Resela. It's like resale, but all E's. And it's a very powerful place. It's called Ur Country. It's still on the move. A couple, micro centimeters a year, we come out of the earth, but like rising. And it's not the only place on the earth that does that, but you can feel it. And I just was totally intrigued. And this American owner and we knew a lot of the same people. It was just strange. And this house had been on the market for 5 years and nobody had really looked at it. And
Wow.
it just was the place for me. And I snapped it up. And yeah, it's just been a real respite for me. And it's been such a departure from everything else. And I thought, I have one place where I can get away from the whole Patton thing. You'll laugh because uh, no sooner did I get it when I was looking at all the nooks and crannies. My friend calls me, she says, you better get up here to the attic. The whole attic had been lined, because it was a 1936 house, been lined with 1939 newspapers. So I like to say it's the only house I ever lived in with a picture of Adolf Hitler. And the other thing is, and I kid you not, it had been years ago the Center for Military Training in Sweden. But when I got here, it was a bit of a ghost town, a lot of abandoned barracks. And over the next few years, of course, we had Syrian refugees, Ukraine refugees. And now, with the NATO expansion, it is now again the center or a center for the military training in Sweden. And here I am. And it's just
Wow.
you can't get rid of you can't shake your heritage.
No, no.
Yeah.
And I correct, you told me that you want to use that house as a respite care for military service members, families.
Right. It's become more than that now. So I have my own little personal cottage here, and I have had soldiers come up and military families. But since then, during COVID, the prices really plunged. We bought a hotel for 130,000. We
Wow.
bought 9 houses for 60,000. I'm telling you, these prices were out of control. And these places were real fixer-uppers. So in the end, you have to
Yeah.
spend a lot. But I decided that this would be a really cool a project to take some of these abandoned buildings and fixer-uppers and one at a time do that. So where we are now is through a lot of permutations. I think we've got one of the most fantastic restaurants for hundreds of miles around in our region.
Wow.
And we've
Wow.
got a hotel, an old clapboard hotel that we're going to open. And it's called Namforshen. That's the name of the waterfalls that are holding the 8,000-year-old petroglyphs. And it's called Patton House. So we have a Patton House stamp. And simultaneous to that, and again, I don't want your listeners to get confused. Simultaneous to that, I was also creating a very important guest house in Normandy, or now it's coming to 3 guest houses at Lafayette Bridge, which is one of the D-Day sites. And so anyway, and what we have here in Sweden emerging is an aspect of what I would say an aspect of the Patton Foundation that will be available for people to come to their center. When never really I started the foundation in Germany as a kind of an exploration of how do you enculturate? How do you deal with another culture? I'd love to explore the dissonance, the cultural dissonance. And I had a whole formula that went with it, which was complicated, but it was all about identifying counterpoint, meaning if you have two conflicting entities or groups or people, you provide a context for them and you allow conflict to happen. That means you put them together on a project. They have to do something together. Sitting at a table and talking, I think never really works. And then the ultimate goal is to reveal the complementarity and answer the question, can my enemy be my friend? And I think that you can. And I've tried to prove it over and over again. It's one of the modus operandis of my whole life is searching to see if my enemy can be my friend. And of course, living in Germany as an American and having children that are half German and really half German. And my grandfather, General Patton, actually, I don't know if you know this, Missy, he rescued the grandfather of my husband, my former husband.
Whoa.
Yes. He rescued him from a Russian firing squad.
Oh my.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
He was a German panzer colonel on the border to what is now Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. And yeah, and my grandfather was there and making an inspection. And Willie told me that. The old man told me that. And yeah, it was pretty moving. So I've always just been gripped by the idea of can my enemy be my friend? And that's why all these places have been so important to me. And the Patton Foundation has finally, after all these years, I feel like we're just starting. Most of my work with the foundation has been about welcoming veterans back to Europe, the World War II veterans. And of course, now they're passing, and I'm so sad. I really have to champion the greatest generation is still ahead of us. And I'm looking at my life and how much I travel and all the places that I call home. If you look at it as like a one big pie and these are slices of the pie, each one has a unique charism. Each one has a unique expression. And the one up here is I want this to be a place of healing, of encounter, of yoga, of meditation, of getting your hands in the dirt. Whereas France is memory, Luxembourg is honor but innovation, and Germany is historical repair. Those are how I see all of these. And America is taking care of the troops.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you do that very well. If anybody follows, you never let moss grow under your feet.
No, I don't.
I love
it's
that
not
about
easy.
you.
Yeah. There's a lot of traveling involved.
You're amazing. It's like the storybook, Where's Waldo? It's like, where is Helen? And I ask you, I'm like, oh, are you going to be traveling this weekend? And I think all the stars aligned that you weren't traveling this weekend and that you're in such a
Thank
calm
God I'm
place.
traveling.
Yeah.
And I got to experience the first snow of the year, which is really nice.
Oh, sounds delightful.
Anyway, you're welcome. You're welcome in any of the places that I frequent.
Well, and that is how I still remember that conversation, Helen. And I think we were standing at the bus stop actually, or maybe I was up at your house, but I just remember saying to you, "Oh yeah, I've got to make plans. My parents are coming over. I want to take them to Normandy." And that's when you shyly was like, "I have a house in Normandy." And I was like, "You do?" I was like, "Wow, fancy that."
Yeah.
And that in itself is a wonderful story. And we had my parents, I think I'm still the favorite child because I
Oh, see,
I
well, you
took
have to come
the
back. Are they still alive? May I ask?
oh yes,
Are they still
yep, they're still
okay?
doing well.
Okay.
Yep. And
The
yeah,
house is great, and Ingmar and Ragnar are just coming into their own. My two sons. I am
yeah.
so excited. I've been hands off of them and pushing them on all this. I rarely ask them to step into any of these events, but boy, they are more and more finding their own way into what it is to be a Patton and a Plishtik. And Ingmar has taken on that house at Nehu. He drove up from Paris last weekend. He's a shoe designer for Balenciaga. He drove up from Paris last weekend and lived there by himself for a few days and picked all the apples without
Oh
even being
my.
asked. Yeah. That
Elizabeth,
place was really important because it's where my grandfather was hidden. He was hidden there for a month during the summer of 44, waiting to get the A-OK from Eisenhower to break out of Avranches.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And we should probably tell our listeners, your grandfather died before you were even born. So you have a lot of these stories, but a
No,
lot
I'm
of these
thinking.
stories, go ahead.
No, I'm thinking about something my brother said to me last night just on this subject. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to say this. Yeah. So let me just, you're going to say, yeah, all these stories. How can I know all these stories? I get these from the soldiers, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was going to
So
say from the soldiers, from the people who lived in those areas at the
mhm.
time and experienced it firsthand. And I think that is in itself very cool that you have taken all those stories and done something
Well,
with it.
it comes from all sides. First of all, just to say that what my brother said last night, he said, Helen, sometimes don't you think that we know more about our grandfather that is actually healthy? I thought that was a great comment. I've been totally led. I've had the opportunity to meet farmers who are still traumatized because as they were tending their field, one of the generals came by and asked which way he should go. And they tried to warn him that the Germans were over there. And he said, yeah, maybe, but he went anyway and walked into a slaughterhouse. And then I've met who've hidden from the Nazis or who were resistors or who housed soldiers or witnessed some atrocities that you don't even want to imagine. But then there's also the aspect which is really almost cosmic. I find myself in my grandfather's footsteps at the oddest times. Like one time my car broke down right at the intersection where he would have directed traffic near Avranches, and I was directing traffic. And I was standing exactly in that place doing the exact same movements of him. I have hundreds of stories like that. I remember I was working on a project in Normandy and it was very intense getting that apple orchard ready, but I had to fulfill some things on my directing degree. So I had to do a quick stint in Idaho, Pocatello. So I was sent to Pocatello, Idaho to do a work
Yeah.
with school children on theater. And they said, ma'am, we're putting you in this house with Miss X, and you'll be staying with Miss Wyzong over in this part of Pocatello. And she's got an extra room for rent or whatever it was. I think she put me up. And she ended up being the daughter of my grandfather's, captain in the field. And
Oh,
at the same time, my graduate school secretary came to me and she says, dear, I've been reading your report about Normandy, and my uncle wrote the weather prayer that your grandfather's so famous for. And it happens like all at once. And you start thinking, this is not an accident.
yeah.
This is not an accident. And then you ask yourself, why? And I don't know, except that there must be some need on some level for there be a revisitation of these places. Meeting my ex-husband and moving into the house in Caseman, by the way, that was owned by 36th Infantry Division. Owned by, sorry,
Yep.
inhabited by the 36th Infantry Division for a short time, who ended up creating my grandfather's final headquarters. And then out of that, we started working with Darden Smith, who then created songwriting for soldiers. Two of his songs that emerged from that project ended up hitting the Texas charts. I don't know if you've ever heard the song Angel Flight.
Yes.
Yeah, that came out of that. That came
Wow.
out of that, out of Casehofen, out of that. And then you think, oh, this is just wild.
Yeah. I do remember some of you showing me some of the things in your house in Casehofen, the writing that was above the
Yeah,
door. And
absolutely. The
yeah.
owners had never seen it. The owners had never seen it. I've got to find that video. The day that we had decided to buy the house, I was videoing at the same time, and it's a beautiful day. And I actually have on camera my father-in-law saying, Was ist das? Guck mal, something's written, and
Yeah.
we actually have it. I've got to get all those tapes out. That's one thing that I regret, and that comes from, frankly, having had a broken marriage. I have put away all of my children's albums. My kids have not seen their children's photos from when they were little. They've never seen the videos from the past. And they've
Yeah.
asked me this year, they said, Mom, we got to get them all together and start looking at them.
I agree.
It's painful,
Yeah.
but I think it's time. They need to have that.
Yeah.
Anyway, but I had too much of that. I remember we were drilled. I think maybe I resisted because I had too much of it. Growing up, it was always Patton past.
Mhm.
And of course yeah. Anyway, do you have any questions? Because I'm chatting away.
I guess one of the questions I have is that all your education is very much in the creative arts, in theater and drama and script writing. And
Yeah.
so I always think it's interesting when you come from a military family, it tends to be very analytical kind of thinkers. But you obviously have a passion for the arts. So where do you think that came from?
Oh, it came from my heritage. Listen, Grandma Patton, first of all, my great grandmother was a Shakespearean actress. My grandmother Patton's mother was a Shakespearean actress with Maude Adams. She was actually doing an acting gig. I think I might have even been in Boston, wherever, when her husband met her. And then she said, I'm sorry, I can't date you tonight. I've got a show. Yeah. And I remember he picked her up backstage in a horse-drawn carriage. There's a funny story there. But then my grandmother Patton was a composer. She actually composed the Second Armored Division March.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, among several other things. She was also a writer, and then on my mother's side of the family, I have 300 years military on both sides, but I also have several hundred years artists. My mother's side of the family, her grandmother was a post-impressionist painter who's well researched now, and you can see her works online, and now all of her works have just moved to the Pennsylvania Academy. Her name was Anna Stanley Holbrook, and she came from General Stanley. And anyway, she painted in Holland and France, and then later on in the military life in Japan and the Philippines, and also in the Alamo. And the Alamo just purchased one of her pictures to have put in the Alamo. Yes, we have artists all in the both of my boys are now artists. But so it runs through the family. We also, as a military family, Mom had traditions. Every year we had to put on a play. We were like the Von Trapp children, and we were. And yeah, and I was usually the comic relief. And my brother Georgie, may he rest in peace, he was mentally handicapped and he had a speech impediment. But he was always Santa Claus, and every Christmas we had the Christmas play, and it was always original. Georgie would always come out from behind the couch and say "ho ho." But my sister would direct, Bob would write, I would provide either the damsel in distress or the comic relief, and then Benjamin was the cutie pie, and then Georgie was Santa Claus. So we just were a theater family. I did community theater growing up at all the military bases. I remember I had my heart broken at Fort Hood because I really decided I wanted to be a serious actress, and I auditioned for all the big shows. And I remember I really wanted to be in some. The funny thing happened on the way to the forum. I wanted to play the courtesan. That was my thing. But because my father was the commanding general, ain't gonna happen. She's not going to play a courtesan. And I just was furious at my
Yeah.
legacy at that point. But
Mhm.
I went, yeah, and I became good at it. I became a very good, I mean, I like to say, I know I was a very good actress. I am, I hope I still am, but I was a good actress. Am I right? Now, whether I would be a Meryl Streep, I always think that I might have ended up to be somebody a little bit more like either Judi Dench or Kathy Bates. That'd be my category. And I did do a movie in Hollywood, and I did a small part in a British film. And I'm doing more and more now. I'm playing myself in a few documentaries. But I used to think about it. I thought there are others that are going to do those parts just as good as you could do them. And there really wasn't. Do you remember that line from Wizard of Oz? There's really nothing in that black bag for me. I used to look at Hollywood and I used to think, it's not really anything in that black bag for me. And now I can tell you that over the last 30 years of this work, I've probably performed for more people, even at one time, than most of my colleagues.
I have
Yeah.
this hope and this dream that the military will finally recognize that you actually do need very creative, outside of the box people in
Mhm.
to make good decisions and to be good leaders, just to have a different perspective from someone who's an engineering major, someday, hopefully, they will recognize that even in a square box kind of environment like the military, you really do need people that think differently than analytically.
Yeah, it gives you, because I would say this also, it just came to me. More and more, the soldiers are also diplomats.
Hmm.
And the arts, especially theater, allows you to understand what it's like to step into somebody's shoes. And I think that's something that we need more and more as we go to these countries, and
Yep.
always hope we are not occupiers. We have to remain liberators. Oh gosh, we asked where it's coming from. I guess you may know, but my grandfather was a poet. He has a whole book of poems. Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, there is a book that you can buy. It's on eBay. It's about $1,000, his poetry book. It's really hard to come by. But he put a lot of work into his poetry. And he has some funny poems like, when I sit in my tank and I wait for the hour and the old barrage comes down, I wish to God there was one more day for raising hell in town. But if you watch the movie Patton, there's a very famous moment where he has a sort of a flashback to a former lifetime, and he quotes a poem that he actually did write called "Through a Glass Darkly."
Oh, wow. There's probably been thousands, maybe even millions of portrayals and articles and books about your grandfather and your family.
Mhm.
Do you find it annoying when they don't get it quite right, or is it just,
No, I get a little bit annoyed at some of the statues, but then I find them quirky and funny, quirky and interesting. I really don't want to diss the most famous ones in Boston and West Point and Luxembourg, but to me, it just looks like James Coburn. I love when they get his really enigmatic face right, which is very rare. They usually, and his vulnerability is often missing. But going to his portrayals in the films, the whole family agrees that George C. Scott knocked it out of the park. My brother wrote a piece called Georgie, which is a prequel, which is in pre-production now. And he actually wrote it with Ryan Gosling in mind, and that would have been perfect. I'm hoping Ryan can stay young enough to play it one day, because he'd be perfect. Kirk Douglas played Grandpa too in Paris is Burning, I think it was called. George Kennedy played him. But George C. Scott, according to Patton's daughter, he didn't talk like my father, he didn't look like my father, but he was my father. And I think that's pretty great praise.
yeah,
High praise.
yeah, really
But
amazing.
the books, yeah, the books, I'd like to say the books. My brother Robert, upon which this book is built, is the movie is based on his book called The Pattons: A Personal Family History. Excellent book. Really gets the human side and describes what created the character of Patton. Even tells you how Grandpa learned how to cuss. And then there's a book my brother Ben wrote called Growing Up Patton, which talks about both of my father and my grandfather. I think one of my favorite books is called The Fighting Pattons, another one paralleling my father, who was a Vietnam officer, and my grandfather. And I'd say my favorite book on Patton, I love Before the Light, before what is it called? Before the Colors Fade. And that was by his nephew, Frederick Eyre Jr. And then I think the top one was Drive by his aide, Charles Codman, who had been a hero in his own right in World War One and then later in World War Two. And wow, this is the guy who started off at the escadrille flying with Noel Coward. Talk about people in the arts being affiliated with the military. But yeah, so that's my pick list.
Yeah. I think about your father, who obviously had a very successful career in the military himself, but it must have been a blessing and a curse, though, to have Patton as a last name.
It was, I'll tell you, first of all, he was more highly decorated than my grandfather.
Wow.
Yeah. And I will say that when he graduated from West Point, he had similar challenges as my grandfather. They both were held back a year for math. I
Wow.
think they both had the same teacher that got him through it too. But yeah, but Dad was pulled aside on his graduation day by one of his professors slash officers, and they said, "You're going to be great. You did great, young George." And he slapped him on the back. "Good luck. You'll never be half the man your father was."
Whoa.
Wow.
And that was really rough on him. It was so rough on him. But from what I understand from his sister, who's no longer living, my father was a much kinder man than his father in general.
Did your father want to be anything other than a soldier? Did he have aspirations?
No. And he asked himself that question, am I doing this just because my dad? No, he truly had the calling. In many ways, he might have even had a more sincere calling than his dad. His dad just wanted to be famous and great. And I think later on in World War II, especially that whole run from France to the Czech Republic and Bavaria and to his death, he learned to be a fuller and more compassionate human being. But he was in it for the notoriety. My father was in it for the real thing. I think he really wanted to serve our country. I don't want to say that my grandfather didn't. My father put country first all.
Yeah.
No.
And we were just talking about soldiers being diplomats. Chris on Veterans Day at Cohen's High School is going to be the keynote speaker. And he decided that he always, when he does a speech, there's always like a theme and always something that grabs your attention. He's read books, he's done little skits and whatever. But so we decided, since it's a room full of high schoolers, he's going to give them a pop quiz. Yeah, all teenagers hate pop quizzes.
Good. That's good.
It's veterans. And so we were talking, and we got this idea. Why don't we quiz them on some of the famous people who have been veterans? And it was really sad that there's not a lot that my kids can still watch somebody on TV or listen to music or whatever in their day and age and their generation that is, oh yeah, he was a veteran. And I think, because you think back, that's some of them that he's going to show is Joe DiMaggio and Elvis and all these famous people that
James Stewart.
James Stewart, that other generations can say our generation, even the famous people were veterans. The one
Willie Nelson. Who do you think of? Chris Christopherson, Willie Nelson. Can we think of any that are in our generation? Who's one now?
Adam Driver. He played, and he has done a lot of work with getting the arts in military. And he is a big proponent of that. Yeah.
But we should I'd be interesting to compile a list of who are veterans. By the way, I'm very close with many of the actors from Band of Brothers. And boy, it's as if they were those people. Yeah. They have taken on the lives of the men that they represented and then the subsequent veterans that they met. I think they have a holy work, those actors. They turn up to Normandy and they know that they're not those guys, but they allow people to project onto them and bring the heroes to the public. And I love being with them. They're longing to do more and more to carry the spirit forward. That's really exciting. So they're practically veterans. In fact, last year they actually went to this, they did the same training as the characters they played did to prepare for D-Day.
I do appreciate it when writers, screenplay writers or actors or whatever, they really do try to get it right. And they put in the work. And that, like you said, those actors from the Band of Brothers, they took on they did it.
George C. Scott saved the movie Patton by trying to get it right. It was originally supposed to be, oh man, the guy that played on the waterfront with Marlon Brando, his name always escapes me. He was supposed to play the part, and he would have been much more appropriate to play my grandfather. You looked at him, and he spoke like my grandfather. My grandfather had a terribly high-pitched voice. Rod Steiger turned down the part, and George C. Scott got the part, and he did his research and was very unhappy with the script, and he had it tuned up to his liking and to the historical accuracy. So my family was really grateful. So when people say, is it all true? The answer is yes. And then later on, among my father's papers, we found a letter from George C. Scott begging the family to do a miniseries because he was very frustrated because he couldn't get everything in. I think this is up your alley. This would be a wonderful person for you to interview. Now I'm going to answer a question. Stephanie von Zeeland has written a book called Lady of the Army about my grandmother. And it's her perspective on my grandfather. It is amazing. It is a great book.
Okay.
Cool.
We were somewhere years ago. The boys were little, and we were about 18. Guthrie was 18 months when we left Germany, and then we went back when he was like in fifth grade to Belgium. But in the meantime, we were someplace, and he loves trains, and it was like a World War II train era, I don't know, summer thing going on. And they had a George Patton look-alike reenactor. And Guthrie was just so turned off. He was like, yeah, I'm not buying it. And
Good for Guthrie. Good for Guthrie.
And I just remember you always saying that your grandfather had a high-pitched voice. And this guy was walking around and he was
my grandfather sounded like Joe Pesci. I mean, that was my grandfather's voice. You just listened to him and he had a speech impediment. He couldn't say R's.
Really?
Yeah, there are clips he talked like this. And he was very emotional. He wore his heart on his sleeve. He broke into tears at a drop of a hat, which is something else my father would do. Do you want to know, you were going to ask me about what I would take with me if my house was burning?
Well, here, Elizabeth will ask you these questions.
All right. You said that the title of your book is It's an Open Book, but some pages are missing.
My life is an open book, but with a few pages ripped out. Yeah.
Oh,
ripped
out.
Ripped out.
And burned.
Ripped out as in other people don't need to know about this particular adventure.
No, that's right. That's right.
Our next question is, what's an unpopular opinion you have that you stand by?
I very much believe in the power of the Catholic Mass, and I try to receive the Eucharist regularly.
All right.
That's beautiful. Yeah. I know your faith is very important to you, Helen, because a page from your book about your life, and maybe this is private to you, but you almost became a nun.
Yes, I wanted to, and that the abbess said where my sister was a nun, and the abbess said, I first one of the nuns said, one Patton is enough, thank you very much, and then the other one said, I'm sorry, but I had to strike a deal with your dad that I would only take one of you. But I feel as though I have learned to be a religious layperson to the best of my ability. But I don't think I'm holier than thou. I'm divorced, and I know that there's some issues in the Catholic Church about that, but I'm working them out. Pope John Paul II made a plea. He made a play for creating the third priesthood. There is the monastic, then there's the ministerial, and then there's the lay priesthood. And the lay priesthood, he said, was missing. And I think that's been my goal. And I've just lost my mom. I lost my brother this year, lost my uncle. And my sister is very much alive, but she's suffering quite a bit with Parkinson's. And so, of course, I'm thinking a lot about death all the time. You think about all the time. You think about death when you lose a parent. And somebody I read today, or I heard, it said, if we fear death, then we fear life. So I do believe that we continue. I think I'm pretty sure it's a stepping over.
Yeah.
But I also believe we create our heaven on earth.
So we'll get to the question that you really wanted to answer, and that is, if your house is on fire and all the humans and all the pets are completely safe and accounted for, what is one thing that you would grab to rescue?
Oh God, I have a whole pile of things here because I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it one, but I'll choose one. Oh my God, I've got some good ones, but
you're not limited by weight. So
okay. Well, this is, imagine I'll bring the table, and the table has on it let's see. This is a bowl that was made for me by our first student that we helped at the Patton Stiftung Foundation in Germany. He was a Bosnian student, and his name is Ismet Lisica. He's an artist and a great artist, and he actually helped me raise my boys in many ways, and I think that's the reason they've both become great artists. But this is something that means a lot to me because he was, like I said, he was our first project, and in it I have a little piece of art that Ingmar did around the time with a rooster here. It's missed its head. And then I've got a little doggy. I guess Ingmar might have made the doggy. And there's a picture of my two boys.
That's how I remember them.
I have my first tip when I was a singing waitress. And I have a little piece of bread here because when I was in COVID and I'm in Sweden, there is no Catholic church around. I'm sorry, it's sacrilegious, but I pretended. And then the pagan in me. Now, this is a little protective god from Greenland that I got on my very first tour as a USO girl, a DOD girl. I wasn't a USO. We were the Department of Defense. I was a singer up in Greenland, and then later on in the Sinai Peninsula, and all sorts of other places, and the Berlin border. But finally, this is a doll that my father brought back to me from Vietnam.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
Yeah, so she's here with me all the time. I don't have a name for her. Maybe I can call her, I don't know. I have to think about it. Kim, maybe.
It's beautiful.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
Gorgeous.
So there you go.
Do you travel with those things? Do you take them every time?
This is it. No, I trust that wherever I am, it's funny because I have this amulet here, but like in my apartment in Reims across from the cathedral, I have a little statue of Saint Teresa who is about like this. All these things I'm really a wild card because I'm a devoted Catholic, but I also believe in fairies. And I'm not kidding you, by the way.
Yeah.
I am not kidding. There is something going on in Sweden. There is something going on. You feel them just like you're just like, what was that? And they're all around, and it just makes you just realize that this world is so mysterious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
At work,
it's probably not a bad idea to have a couple different bases covered, right?
True.
Whatever. Exactly.
I feel like how we worship is very guided by traditions that humans have evolved. And so we may not really know what is the path to enlightenment. So having a couple different avenues, I think, is very smart.
You're not saying that we have to hedge our bets? Is that what you're
saying? Being open to love is being open to all kinds of love.
That's right.
We have 2 more questions.
Oh, good. No problem.
But I would call them the easier questions. What organization do you support that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think right now my favorite organization to work with is Wish for Our Heroes. They are partners with the Patton Foundation, but I'm learning so much from them. And Jeff Wells, who is their president or founder, has also joined us as our leader. He's a young veteran, and is just devoted to helping the daily needs of veterans and soldiers and their families in need. I've been now affiliated with them for a couple of years. And when you go to one of their events, I'll give you an example. Last year, and we're about to have another one, we had a Christmas party in San Antonio at a wonderful venue called Pedrati's. And 25 families were invited, and they didn't know why they were invited, but they're soldiers' families. Bring your kids. We're going to have a nice evening of candy cake and whatever. And they were presented with a Christmas tree and an opulent amount of gifts for the whole family.
Oh, how lovely.
Yeah. And so they have these events twice a year. They raise a lot of money. They'll not just give presents. If a child His parents can't afford his heart operation. They'll take care of it. If they really don't have a car, they need a car, they'll take care of it. Things like that, that they're really, and they'll analyze it so it's not just a free for all. But
Sure.
I'm learning about it. But man, it's one of those organizations where you're at one of their events, whether you're a donor or bystander, you say, there is nothing in here that is underhanded. Feels really good. Wish for our heroes.
Wish for our heroes.
Very cool.
Yeah. Partner to the Patton Foundation now.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, the last one is, and this is a dumb question to you because I'm sure you have stables upon stables of interesting friends. But what friend do you have that has an interesting story that you think we should interview next?
God, I had a whole bunch of them in my head before I started. Oh, I was going to, because we're on this theme of the military and Vietnam also, I would like you to interview Donna Watkins. She is the wife of my father's pilot, Charlie Watkins. Both of them could come on together, but she is, like Missy, a quintessential military wife from the Vietnam era. And I met her when she was a newlywed. And we are still so close. And I always told Charlie if my boyfriend would ever get it together to ask me to marry him, I'd ask Charlie to walk me down the aisle. And his wife would be right there as my mother proxy. They're the closest things to my parents, I think, that are on this earth.
Oh, wow. That's lovely.
Yeah.
Helen, I know you're a busy person, and I'm not sure what time it is in Sweden.
I love you. I made me want to start the day all over again. You're such a great energy.
I want to say this to you and to everybody. I'm just glad that people get to hear and know you for being Helen.
Thank you.
And not because you're Patton or your family's history, but because you are one of the best souls on earth. So.
I appreciate that. I do want to say that I appreciate that so much, and I'm very touched, and it's a lot to live up to. I do reflect back on this interview now, and I'm thinking the pages didn't get ripped out.
Aww. Well, we love all your pages, Helen. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. This has been a dream.
All right.
Thank you for your time.
You. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Love ya.
Love ya.
Wow. That was so amazing.
Good. I'm glad it went well. I was nervous all day.
Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, how do you think about our interview with Helen today?
Wow, what an incredible privilege. I think if you took someone that knew nothing about the military and said, name a famous military person, I think Patton would be one of the ones that would come to people's mind. And to meet her, she just seems, I know she is, just a very humble servant. And there's so many ways that the children of famous people, like a couple generations of famous people, can just get really messed up. And she seems to be the opposite. Very grounded, very interested in paying it forward. And I'm glad that she made the time for us. That was very lovely.
Oh, like I said in the interview, all the stars aligned. That was been the struggle all along, is she is very busy. And yeah, I'm just so grateful for her time. And when I met her 20 some years ago, that was probably some of our first in-depth conversations, was how she could use her family's name to better things for other military families, veterans, how she could make it better for other people. It was never about her. And I think that's the thing I admired. And she always listened to me. She always listened to veterans and other people. From the beginning, I knew, like, she and I are, as far as different people, she's very highly educated and smart and well connected, but she always just took the time for me. And that's what she does for all of her interactions. I've seen her at Normandy when she goes there for the celebrations, and it's all about the soldiers, and she gives so much of her time, her resources to veterans. So it's beautiful.
There's so many bits of our conversation that like came and went before we got a chance to dive into
Yeah,
it, which would be a whole other podcast. Like
right.
movies to be produced, or her brother's has written a book about her grandfather's early life, or her
Right.
son is a shoe designer for a very famous company. Wait, what? I feel like in her book, with maybe some pages ripped out, there are hundreds of
Yeah.
pages that we just barely got a chance to skim through.
For sure. For sure. And I am glad that she's so gracious to talk about the Patton family, even though sometimes it can be a crutch or it can be
Yeah.
just this overwhelming responsibility. But she's always still so gracious to talk about him. And we learned interesting things and just all of the kind of little nuggets that happen chance and that you may not read about in books or see in the Patton movie. And I gotta make sure people understand that she never met her grandfather.
Yeah.
Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, you're here representing your grandfather, the Patton family. What was he like?
Mhm.
And again, like we said in the interview, she's taken all these stories that she's gathered over
Sure.
her lifetime of hearing about him and really hearing about it secondhand.
Mhm.
But I think her and her siblings have done a very good job of
Yeah.
honoring his legacy. And her life is just so fascinating, from her almost being a nun and being told that they could only have one one Patton nun. Her sister's life is fascinating as well, but just her outlook on life and her faith, her spiritual life, and how she looks at the world. And yeah, I've been honored to know her these past couple years.
She seemed very open to where life was going to take her, and I appreciate that very much.
Yeah, definitely a visionary. Definitely, she just walks through life, just trying to touch things and make them better. And I think that's what she's done there, and Reims and Casehofen and Luxembourg and
Yep.
Massachusetts, everywhere she goes.
Find us at facebook.com/YSMMF podcast and Instagram at YSMMF podcast for episode announcements. Thanks.
And I think the world should hear from you. I think you should be telling people what you think a lot, because you're just you're wise. Okay, that's all I have to say. 2 words more. You're wise. Done.